Okay. Good evening. And welcome to everyone who's joining us on the internet. Well, you all love to think, don't you? And what you don't realize is the devastating effect it has on your experience of being. You also do not realize the temporary beneficial effect it can have on your lives. I say temporary because thinking, used intelligently, quickly helps you move to a point beyond thinking. There's been a heavy subject of death presented to all of you over the last couple of weeks. And when you leave tonight, I'd like you to contemplate how you used your mind over this past week and a half as you were confronted with the subject of death. I'm also going to ask you to contemplate how consistent your thinking was with what we discussed last week. You know, God has withheld nothing of what He is from His self-expression called you. But there are three things you didn't get. They weren't things He could give. But the three things you didn't get were sin, sickness, and death. If they weren't given to you, they're not your birthright. If they're not your birthright, then any one of them as a topic of thought is useless and meaningless. At the bottom of the screen on your TV, the Pope's condition is very grave. How many of you thought, oh dear? You see, I could say, you see how lazy you are? But I'm going to say, do you see that you're not quick enough to catch the suggestion? You were invited into a concept that you shouldn't have allowed yourself to be invited into, but rather you should have said, that's ridiculous. When you said, oh dear, you were sending out a messenger. And your messengers always come back to you confirming the purpose for which they were sent out. But there's another point you must realize. The messengers you send out are the messengers that are teaching you about you. And when you say, oh dear, about anyone's grave condition, you're saying, this is my inevitability. And you're teaching yourself. Why? Because you didn't contradict it. You acquiesced to it. earlier this evening. I heard someone say, well, he's behaving like he's a young man. So it's a stupid him, you know. He's not a spring chicken anymore. That's just another form of the same teaching. It's the way you create a grave condition. That will lead you to the grave. Why talk about, why consider the fact that every single one of you is the Christ? Why consider that every single one of you is the direct expression of God? In other words, that you aren't a unique dropping, we'll say, something left behind by God, that came from God, was made by God, but doesn't have anything to do with God anymore. When you're, at this instant, and at every instant, the living proof, you might say, the living evidence of a current and living God. You've got to be more alert. The reason we consider these things is so that you will, first of all, think better. Use better thought processes. And also, so that you will dare to take time not to think, so that you are not filling your mind with that which distracts you and blocks you from the experience of the directness of God's movement of creation right where you are in that moment, which has nothing to do with sin, has nothing to do with sickness or deterioration or death. If you're going to be sloppy, you're going to have the continued evidence of sloppy mindfulness, sloppy unmindfulness. And there's going to be no transformation. And you might as well throw the book in your bookcase and just go out and watch the footnotes on your TV screens. And learn from there, and be from there. And never become an agent for change in, quote, the world. By what? Thinking wonderful new things about it? No. By being in a new way relative to it. Now one can say, that's going to be a lot of work. but just get your feet on the ground. You're thinking something. Why not think the truth? Why not think that which leads you into a clearer experience of truth? Why not think that which allows you to have enough truth to become quiet, to go into the silence and invite the influx of the direct experience of what God is being right where you are? You all need new evidence. In your life experience. In your life experience. Not your life experience out there in the world, but in your experience of everything. If you've been watching the TV, you know that once the Pope died, certain ritualistic processes began. As though that were unique to the church processes. But you want to know something? Certain ritualistic processes began quite a while ago. In preparation for what? The death of the Pope. I mean, it's so expected that your TV networks already had his obituary in the can, on a shelf to be pulled out. And why do they have it in the can instead of responding in the moment? So that another network doesn't beat them to the punch with better coverage. How would you like your obituaries and a reflection on your life to already be in the can today? Doesn't that send out a message? Isn't that a messenger? The whole human condition that we spoke about last week is made up of this kind of already organized processes set in place to accommodate for and account for everyone's death, including yours. And you already have some things in the can about yours. Well, you're not a spring chicken anymore. Well, you know, when you get to be that age, you're very likely to have this condition, because there's nothing real about your body. It's just a hunk of matter. And matter deteriorates. Matter is not eternal. And so you accommodate for that. And you say, well, okay, but I'm a divine idea of God. My soul will survive. And so you find a way not to feel too bad about the loss of the visibility and tangibility of you, because something will survive. And that very thought secures the deterioration and death and disappearance of your body. Except, you just have one giant surprise. The moment death happens, you find out that although you're not with everyone else, you still have a body. You're still fully identified. That which renders you visible and tangible is still with you because it's where you are, always. So what was all this nonsense that you had gotten in the can about yourself ahead of time that led you to not challenge the idea of your mortality, and that led you not to challenge the idea that there's matter at all? Why did you go through this week since last Sunday when we spoke together? Why did you go through this week and not challenge what you saw and what you heard? Why did you let your feelings be moved out of or from some level of compassion for this person going through this thing called death? Why didn't you, with joy, remember what we talked about last week and use that to replace the invitation? I gave you an invitation last week. Why didn't you let that replace the invitation that the news media was presenting to you? maybe you can say that it would have been unrealistic for you to think that it might have been responsible for the Pope's recovery. But you know, what you can't talk away is the fact that the way you used your mind didn't move you any closer to the resurrection, didn't move you any closer to being one who gives evidence of the deathlessness of being. Now, am I scolding you? No. I'm saying you missed an opportunity. You missed an opportunity to experience insight at a time when everyone was succumbing to a misunderstanding of what life is. There was succumbing to the ongoingness of the status quo. You didn't have the joy of finding your freedom from the discouraging experience of being a sheep following the leader, whoever it might be at the moment. And as a result, you didn't become part of that which would shift not only your future, but the future of everyone else. Because the messengers you would have been sending out would have been like the dominoes starting a new result. How many of you, before the Pope passed on, already began to already treat him as though he wasn't here? Well, I wonder who the new Pope is going to be. I know some are more liberal and others are less liberal, and maybe we'll finally get a Pope that will let the priests marry, and maybe let women become priests. Poor Pope John Paul. He's still alive. And like they did. They accidentally rang the bells while he was still alive that announced his death. And you're ringing the bells already too. While he's still alive, you're saying, well, I wonder what it's going to be like with the new Pope. Now, life is not that expendable. It's not kind or loving to discount someone because, now there's an opportunity for maybe some progressive change. Well, so much for the wonderful obituaries that the networks have put together. You're already discounting his life because he didn't do what maybe somebody will do now. And so your obituary of him is less than lovely, less than complimentary. He did wonderful things, but you know what? It's time for a new paradigm. How often do you hold someone's continuing existence responsible for your lack? Well, at least when she goes, I'll have some freedom from such and such. Or when he dies, I'll get his inheritance. I'm really, really in need. Which says, I wish he would die soon. You see, when you begin to think without having listened for the truth, the result is confusing. The result is malicious. The result is self-centered. The result is competitive. The result is insanity. You know, in Peter Pan, Tinkerbell was dying. And all it took was someone believing in fairies to bring her back to life. Well, of course, everybody's too grown up to believe in fairies, right? And everybody's too grown up to believe in not dying. You know too much of the facts. But what you know is made up of confidences that are sheer idiocy. From within the level of ignorance, what you think is not seen as idiocy. My telling you that it is idiocy is not a criticism of you, but it's giving you a perspective from outside of the box you're caught in. I say it so that you can say it. And thus, not buy into it willy-nilly, thoughtlessly. There need to be growing numbers of people who watch the TV with news of the sort that was on this past week, who are saying, that's not the truth, when the captions come on. Or in somber voices, everyone speaks kindly and respectfully of somebody worthy of respect. But they speak that way in the shadow of death. Of course, when he's healthy and vital, the respect goes out of the way and a lot of criticism can come into play. But what if increasing numbers of people, confronted with what was presented this past week and a half, were seeing it and contradicting it in their mind, saying, that's ridiculous, that's absurd. How could anyone believe this about the visibility and tangibility, the presencing of God right there? That is the only thing that's going on. That has to be the only thing really going on. Like Tinkerbell, when someone believed in fairies, was resuscitated, the whole human mindset would be lifted, would become less dense. And those messengers that you send out would come back with increasing confirmation of their intent. And so the blessing you would receive by extending the acknowledgement of truth and by the sending out of the messengers of truth, the blessing you would receive, because that's what happens when you give it, would bless you as well as the recipients. And a new movement would begin. And that's what this is all about. This isn't mind control. This isn't manipulation. Because remember, there's no matter to manipulate. There's only the substance of spirit, which is what the visibility and tangibility of the presence of God is constituted of. So it's not matter that needs to be changed, and it's not matter that can be manipulated, because there ain't no such thing. But you might say the tone of mind shifts and contributes with a domino effect, the shifting of mind in those who are likewise caught in their thinking. So the question is, what are you doing with your mind? What I'm describing to you and what I'm encouraging you to become involved in will be much more satisfying and much more fulfilling to you. Because even though it involves thinking, it sets your mind on the right track, on the right tone. It will reduce fear in you, because you will not be confirming your own death knell as you confirm someone else's. And as you begin to be lightened, as you are more lightened up, you will find it easier to expect not death, not disease, not deterioration, but more and more evidences of life, more and more evidences of what we'll call regeneration. Not regeneration of matter, but regeneration, renewal of your mind habits, and what you invite in to occupy it. And that in itself will be self-fulfilling life. Pulsing, you might say. Moving in you as a new you, as you renewed. Bringing you back into your original, primitive state of divine being, which has always been your birthright to be experiencing.